I can't make it on time. It's so annoying. But yeah, I can't make it on time. What is it? It's almost 6. Oh my goodness. Okay. I've got to. My computer, the hard drive filled up. I don't know. Am I still streaming? Yeah, because I record at the same time. But yeah, let's see. OBS is saying it's got 2.5 something gigs. Um, so I gotta face the music and make some space on my device. Do I want to do this? Not really. My local disguise got a lot of space on it, but I don't want to move into that. What I should move into, and I also don't want to move into this. Should move into this. All right, so this is not an easy choice to make. Let's say 19.2 gigs. I think I can get this much off. Into the passport. One moment, please. And let's make the most of this. Um, somebody ought to color these manga guides. That's one of the heartbreaking things, that I had to leave all my books in China. Well, you know, I didn't take any books to China, but books in China are, with, you know, like if you have what I had, which was a decent salary, you could afford all the books you wanted. Lots of them. It's great. And I had these manga guides, which were real popular in China, and they're all in Chinese. Great. For me as a technical, you know, I need technical Chinese to teach technical classes in the Chinese language. So the manga guides were great. You know, there was one on electricity and magnetism. Right, it's really good. And it had this cute manga girl with a balcony you could do Shakespeare from. She was like the landlady of the there's a apartment building, and the elevator was broken down, and one of the guys that lived there had to meet with her and figure out how to fix the elevator. And they hung out for a really long time figuring out all the electrical stuff, and they got it all figured out, you know. And then they called the elevator repairman. He came and fixed it. So it was all like this big, you know, oh, we're forced together by circumstances. Have to figure out but, you know, then in the end, when you call the elevator guy, I guess you know that you were forced together by other forces. Yeah. But anyway, what a crazy morning. I did, you know, get up early enough to be on time and to be playing. And look at this. How could this happen? Repairing some demo screens. Yeah. All Winners comics. Definitely the peak of the anti-Japanese sentiments. Human Torch. Did you know Human Torch had its own comic book? And this is before Fantastic Four, you know? So, and look, it's like even before the Space Age, whereas in Fantastic Four, you know, what did that come out in the 60s? Right? And this is like the 40s, and the Human Torch is there. Right? It's a different Human Torch? Yeah. Let's resurrect Human Torch. But we'll say that he became a Human Torch because of exposure to cosmic radiation from the sun. Whatever. My super califragilistic favorite Mad Magazine episode thing. Mad leads the fight to conserve energy. Frontline combat. I know I'm focusing on the Frontline Combat comic book. That's Harvey Kurtzman's artistry. Yeah, I wouldn't be looking at anything but that. doing a little testing here, thinking about ways that various things could be automated. El Blue Demon, the wrestling champion. Yeah, he could never beat Santo. El Santo, El Mascarado de Plata. Look, it's Bugs Bunny and drag. It's Brunhilde. Okay. Alright, so I was just curious how things were sizing up. And, yeah. I'm on my daughter's account here. View pending. What? In tournament now. Wow. 8. Awesome. A little bit. Highest bracket professional. See, I'm missing all these heats, right? I don't know how that happens. One of these days I'm gonna have to figure out the timing of it and everything. Pay attention for a change. I mean, I pay attention to stuff. I really do. Not using the thermal lens. Not using the RPG. I really only need to spend 2,000. I think is the objective. Yeah. So close, man. What is that? It's gonna take 2 weeks. 2 more weeks, and I'll be able to upgrade my MD. I'm checking out 6 of 7. Complete 30 daily objectives. It's only gonna take 1 week, maybe. Research playoff. A minigun. Do I have any heavy duty weapons? Acolyte challenge. Look at all these things I need to get done, man. Spend the big wheel. It's gonna be a skin. And a skin for a robot that I don't have. And it's not even epic. Well, that stinks. But hey, got that 400 coins. Let's see. 5 days and 19 hours to get to the very top. Spin the big wheel enough times. Huh. Spud boy. Let's see. Three days, man. My God. These guys don't play this game anymore. Or maybe they're in rehab. I imagine for some people this game could be a problem. Mugwump. You guys are going to get a respite. Because I had some fun playing with you before. Enough for me to remember you. So, I'm not going to immediately delete you yet. Fusion Cannon 8. Well, I guess nobody's online. I don't know what the prime Mech Arena times to play are. Sky Legend didn't join me. Okay. Why? Guess I'm not getting my 10%. Dang it. Let's see what we got here in the way of music. Guess I'm really not recording today. Oh. Oh, there's somebody. Oh, and I don't have a thingamajigger with the whatchamabob behind it. I wonder if that's going to be instant death. Man. I just try it, you know. Can I get all the way behind the guy and yeah. I forgot. I stepped right into that. That was a really an accidental fall. Yes. I cannot be hit by these guys. Oh, I hit for overtime. Awesome. With one good shot. Oh, man. Ouch. 15-15. That's going to be a draw. Let's see. Be a little bit more sensible. Yeah, that's one of my guys. I saw water to wine. Your water was whining. This guy with the 3 semicolon guy. What's this? I like that. Barbacoa. Dum 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 dum. That's all right. Yep. Oh, Barbacoa, I got your revenge badge. Congratulations. Dum 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 dum. Dang it! Supposed to kill you. Didn't work out, did it? Oh, jeez Louise. And this panther is like tinfoil. Bank. You kidding me, right? I do all that fancy schmancy maneuverization-alizationalisms. It's all for naught. Come on! Die! Die! No! Let's see. Well, that's gonna. I wonder if this music will help me play better. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. This guy's a bot. Oh! Ouch. Oh. If at first you don't succeed, give up! No. I'm in a death trap! Help! All my fault. That's all I can say. Did I drop? Get out of the way! Stand there! You're gonna get killed! I love that. That's when you're doing support on a mech and that mech gets MVP. That's a feeling of, yeah, you know you had a part in that. Awesome. Okay, he dropped down. Wow. Okay, my new rule though is try 'em twice. It's 1,000 squad power, more than 1,000 higher than me. Whew, it's gonna be tough. Oh man, Mugwump. No way. Hey. Dang it. Well, having a good old time. She's kind of cute.
Onslaught. That's what it is. Two gold medals. Wow. Marhoisig? Nobody. I moved up a bracket. Swerve, dang it. Swerve, wait, stop. Ah! Ya-ta-ta, ya-ta-ta. What's up, Doc? Couldn't get undercover fast enough. Can you go away? Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Oh. Go fight with somebody else. Come on. Come on. Come on. There. Nice old mecha bozo. I just got one of those. How come I'm eliminated by him? Oh, he was eliminated by me as well. He's mad. And dude, lay down and die? Kidding me, right? Put my shield on. Let's swerve. Trying to get his revenge coin. That oh, excuse me. Come back, Johnny. Johnny be good. Treat her like a should. Wow, it's doing nothing to him. Right. Oh, that's the target that's taking. Come on, come on, come on. Just barely. I cannot believe it. Wow.
Various opinions and ideas were aired. the most curious propositions were made. A preacher, named Schwager, wrote, "I have always been averse to hating an unfortunate nation, because it worships God in another way. I have always lamented that we have driven the Jews to deceive us by an oppressive political yoke. For, what else can they do, in order to live? In what other way can they defray their heavy taxes?" Diaz, Dom's excellent friend, one of the noblest men of that epoch, afterwards Prussian ambassador to the Turkish court, thought that Dom had asked far too little for the Jews. 359. "You aver most truly," he remarked, "that the present moral depravity of the Jews is a consequence of their bondage. But to color the picture, and weaken the reproaches leveled at the Jews, a representation of the moral depravity of the Christians would have been useful. Certainly it is not less than that of the Jews, and rather the cause of the latter." John von Emler, the talented historian of the Swiss, with his wide attainments in general history, also admired the glorious antiquity of the Jews, praised Dom's efforts on behalf of the Jews, and supplied him from the treasures of his knowledge with new proofs of the unjust and pitiless persecution of the medieval Jews, and their demoralization by intolerable tyranny. He wished the writings of Maimuni, the Luther of the Jews, to be translated into one of the European languages. Naturally, hostile pamphlets were not wanting. Especially noteworthy was an abusive tract, published in Prague, entitled Upon the Inutility of the Jews in the Kingdoms of Bohemia and Moravia, in which the author indulged in common insults against the Jews, and revived all the charges of poisoning wells, sedition, and other pretexts for their expulsion. This scurrilous work was so violent, that Emperor Joseph forbade its circulation March 2, 1782. A bitter opponent of the Jews at this time was Frederick Traugott Hartmann. And why? Because he had been cheated out of a few pennies by Jewish hawkers. On account of their venomous tone, however, these writings harmed the Jews less than those of the German pedants. To these belonged a famous scholar of authority, John David Michaelis, the aged professor at Göttingen. His range of vision had been widened by travels and observation, and he had cut himself adrift from the narrowness of Lutheran theology. Michaelis was the founder of the rationalist school of theologians, who resolved the miracles and the sublimity of the Holy Scriptures into simple natural facts. Through his Mosaic Law, and cultivation 360 of Hebrew grammar and exegesis, he gained high repute. But Michaelis had exactly the proportion of unbelief and belief which made him hate the Jews as the bearers of revealed religion and a miraculous history, and despise them as antagonists of Christianity. A Jewish officer in the French army, when it was stationed in Göttingen, had given but a grudging salute in return for the slavish obeisances of the professors, which they held as due to every Frenchman. This was ground enough for Michaelis to abominate the Jews one and all, and to affirm that they were of despicable character. Michaelis had several years before remarked, on the appearance of Lessing's drama The Jew, that a noble Jew was a poetic impossibility. Experience had disproved this assertion through Mendelssohn and other persons. But a German professor cannot be mistaken. Michaelis adhered to his opinion that the Jews were an incorrigible race. Now he condemned the Jews from a theological point of view, now from political considerations. It is hard to say whether it is to be called insensibility, intellectual dullness, or malice, when Michaelis blurts out with, "It seems to me, that here in Germany they the Jews already have everything that they could possibly desire, and I do not know what he Dom wishes to add thereto. Medicine, philosophy, physics, mathematics, they are not excluded from, and he himself does not wish them to have offices." He even defended the taking of protection money from the Jews. It cannot be said that the anti-Jewish treatise of Michaelis injured them at the time, for in no case would the German princes and people have emancipated them, had not the imperious progress of history compelled it. But in after years Michaelis was employed as an authority against the Jews. The agitation excited by Dom, and the views pro and con had only resulted in forming public opinion upon Judaism, and this affected not Germany, but 361 France. Miraculous concatenation of historical events. The venomous Alsatian district judge wished to have the Jews of Alsace annihilated, and through his malice he actually facilitated the liberation of the Jews in France. Mendelssohn prudently kept himself in the background in this movement. He did not desire to have attention drawn to him as a prejudiced defender of his brethren in religion and race. He blessed the outbreak of interest in his unhappy kinsman. Blessed be Almighty Providence that has allowed me, at the end of my days, to see the happy time when the rights of humanity begin to be realized in their true extent. However, two things induced him to break silence. He found that the arrows hurled by Dom had been insufficient to pierce the thick-skinned monster of Jew hatred. Reason and humanity have raised their voices in vain, for gray-headed prejudice is deaf. Dom himself did not appear to him to be free from the general prejudice, because he admitted that the Jews of the present day were depraved, useless, even harmful. Therefore he suggested means to improve them. But Mendelssohn, who knew his co-religionists better, did not find them so greatly infected with moral leprosy or differing so widely from Christians of the same class and trade as arrogant Christians in their self-glorification were wont to assert. In a very clever way Mendelssohn made not alone the Getaean scholars Michaelis and Hartmann, but also Dom, understand that they had misconceived the Jewish question. It is wonderful to note how prejudice assumes the forms of every century in order to act despotically towards us, and place difficulties in the way of our obtaining civil rights. In superstitious ages we were said to insult sacred objects out of mere wantonness, to pierce crucifixes and cause them to bleed, secretly to circumcise children 362 and stab them in order to feast our eyes upon the sight, to draw Christian blood for our Passover, to poison wells. Now times have changed, calumny no longer makes the desired impression. Now we, in turn, are upbraided with superstition and ignorance, lack of moral sentiments, taste, and refined manners, incapacity for the arts, sciences, and useful pursuits, especially for the service of war and the state, invincible inclination to cheating, usury, and lawlessness. All these have taken the place of coarse indictments against us, to exclude us from the number of useful citizens, and reject us from the motherly bosom of the state. They tie our hands, and reproach us that we do not use them. Reason and the spirit of research of our century have not yet wiped away all traces of barbarism in history. Many a legend of the past has obtained credit, because it has not occurred to anyone to cast doubts upon it. Some are supported by such important authorities that few have the boldness to look upon them as legends and libels. Even at the present moment there is many a city of Germany where no circumcised person, even though he pays duty for his creed, is allowed to issue forth in open daylight unwatched, lest he kidnap a Christian child or poison the wells. While during the night he is not trusted under the strictest surveillance, owing to his well-known intercourse with evil spirits. The second point in Dom's memoir which did not please Mendelssohn was, that it demanded the recognition of the state for the Jewish religion, inasmuch as the government was to grant it the right of excluding unruly members by a sort of excommunication. This did not harmonize with his conception of a pure religion. In order to counteract the errors of Dom's well-meant apology, and the obstinate misapprehension of the Jews as much as possible, Mendelssohn caused one of his young friends, the physician Marcus Herz, to translate from the English original the Vindici Dudrum of Manasseh ben Israel against the numerous slanderous charges brought against them. He himself wrote a preface full of luminous, glowing thoughts March, 1782, called The Salvation of the Jews, as an appendix to Dom's work. Manasseh's apology was buried in a book little read. Mendelssohn made its excellent truths known among the cultured classes, and by a correct elucidation gave them proper emphasis. In this preface he insisted, that while the Church arrogates the right of inflicting punishment upon its followers, religion, the true 363 faith, based upon reason and love of humanity, requires neither an arm nor a finger for its purpose. It concerns only the spirit and the heart. Moreover, it does not drive sinners and renegades from its doors. Without knowing the whole extent of the harm caused by it in the course of Jewish history, Mendelssohn detested the interdicting power. He therefore adjured the rabbis and elders to give up the right of excommunicating. Alas! My brethren, you have felt the oppressive yoke of intolerance only too severely. All the nations of the earth seem hitherto to have been deluded by the idea that religion can be maintained only by an iron hand. You, perhaps, have suffered yourselves to be misled into thinking the same. Oh, my brethren, follow the example of love, as you have till now followed that of hatred. Mendelssohn now held so high a position in public opinion, that every new publication bearing his name was eagerly read. The fundamental thought of the preface to Manasseh ben Israel's Vindication, that religion has no rights over its followers and must not resort to compulsory measures, struck its readers with astonishment. This had never occurred to any Christian believer. Enlightened Christian clergymen, such as Teller, Spalding, Zolliker, and others, gradually fell in with the new idea, and tendered its originator public applause. Bigoted clerics and obdurate minds, on the other hand, beheld therein the destruction of religion. All this is new and difficult. First principles are denied, said they. In Jewish circles also many objections were made to Mendelssohn's view. It seemed as if he had suddenly discarded Judaism, which certainly owns an elaborate system of penalties for religious crimes and transgressions. From the Christian camp a pamphlet called Inquiry into Light and Truth was launched against him, which asserted that he had finally dropped his mask. That he had embraced the religion of love, and turned his back upon his native faith, which execrates and punishes. 364. A second time Mendelssohn was compelled to emerge from his retirement, and give his views upon religion. This he did in a work entitled Jerusalem, or Upon Ecclesiastical Power and Judaism Spring, 1783, whose purity of contents and form is a memorial of his lofty genius. The gentleness that breathes through this book, the warmth of conviction, the frankness of utterance, its childlike ingenuousness, yet profoundly thoughtful train of ideas, the graceful style which renders even dry discussion enjoyable, these qualities earned contemporary approval for this work, and will always assure it a place in literature. At the time it excited great surprise. It had been believed that, owing to his ideas upon religion and Judaism, Mendelssohn, if he had not entirely broken away from Judaism, had yet declared many things therein to be worthless. He now showed that he was an ardent Jew, and would not yield a tittle of existing Judaism, either rabbinical or biblical. That he, in fact, claimed the highest privileges for it. All this was in accord with his peculiar method of thought. Judaism recognizes the freedom of religious convictions. Original, pure Judaism, therefore, contains no binding articles of belief, no symbolical books, by which the faithful were compelled to swear and affirm their incumbent duty. Judaism prescribes not faith, but knowledge, and it urges that its doctrines be taken to heart. In this despised religion everyone may think, opine, and err as he pleases, without incurring the guilt of heresy. Its right of inflicting punishment begins only when evil thoughts become acts. Why? Because Judaism is not revealed religion, but revealed legislation. Its first precept is not, thou shalt believe or not believe, but, thou shalt do or abstain from doing. In the divinely ordained constitution, state and religion are one. Not unbelief, false teaching, and error, but wicked offenses against the principles of the state and the national constitution are chastised 365 with the destruction of the temple, i.e., with the downfall of the state, all corporal and capital punishment, as well as money fines, ceased. The national bonds were dissolved. Religious trespasses were no longer crimes against the state, and religion, as such, knows no punishments. For those who seriously or jestingly had reported that Mendelssohn had separated from Judaism, he laid stress upon 2 points not wholly germane to his subject, viz., that the so-called ceremonial law of Judaism is likewise, indeed particularly, of divine origin, and that its obligatory character must continue until it pleases the Supreme to abrogate it as plainly and publicly as it was revealed. The effect of this detailed apology was greater than Mendelssohn could have expected. Instead of defending himself, he had come forward as an accuser, and in a manner at once gentle and forcible he had laid bare the hateful ulcers of the church and state constitution. Two authoritative representatives of the age pronounced flattering opinions upon him and the subject which he was discussing. Kant, who had already testified to his greatness of thought, wrote that he had read Jerusalem with admiration for its keenness of argument, its refinement, and cleverness of composition. I consider this book the herald of a great reform, which will affect not alone your nation, but also others. You have succeeded in combining your religion with such a degree of freedom of conscience as was never imagined possible, and of which no other faith can boast. You have, at the same time, so thoroughly and clearly demonstrated the necessity of unlimited liberty of conscience in every religion, that ultimately our Church will also be led to reflect how to remove from its midst everything that disturbs and oppresses conscience, which will finally unite all men in their view of the essential points of religion. Michaelis, the rationalistic anti-Semite, stood baffled, embarrassed, and ashamed before the bold ideas of the Jerusalem. Judaism, which he had scornfully disdained, now fearlessly and victoriously raised its head. The Jew Mendelssohn, whom he would not have trusted with a penny, appeared the 366 incarnation of conscientiousness and wisdom. Michaelis was sorely perplexed in passing judgment upon this remarkable work. He was obliged to admit many things. Thus, without selfish motives, impelled only by circumstances, Mendelssohn glorified Judaism, and shook off disgrace from his people. In the meantime Dom was aiding him. He continued to expound Judaism in the most favorable light, and refute all objections, the honest as well as the malicious ones. He had come to regard the quarrel as his own. But Dom affected most by enlisting through his writings in favor of Jews the sympathies of Mirabeau, a man with shoulders strong enough to bear a new system of the world, and he continued the work of Dom. At the same time, and in the same way, that is, indirectly, Mendelssohn again urged the internal rejuvenescence of the Jews, which was to accompany their emancipation. From modesty or discretion, he would not come to the front. He had stimulated Dom to do battle for their emancipation, and for their regeneration he brought forward another friend, who appeared born for the task. Owing to Mendelssohn, Wesley became a historical personage, who worked with all his energy for the improvement of the Jews, completing the deficiency of Mendelssohn's retiring character. Hartwig Naphtali Herz Wesley, born in Hamburg.
I can't believe that you're
1725,
standing like in the central
died in the same
of the
town,
arena on a high
1805,
platform.
was of a peculiar disposition, combining elements
Somebody
not
hits you
often
45 degrees
associated.
to your flank,
His
completely within your
grandfather
field of
had
view, and
established
you're
a
mad?
manufactory for arms in Holstein, and had been a commercial counselor and royal
Get
resident.
mad.
His father also conducted an important
Nice.
business, and had frequent intercourse with so-called great people. In this way Hartwig Wesley came with his father to Copenhagen, where a Portuguese congregation,
King
and also
Nigel,
a
King
few
Nigel.
German Jews had settled.
Yeah.
His early education
Nigel.
was the same
Somebody
as that
killed
of
King
most
Nigel. He's got
367
one hit
boys
point. There
of
it
that
is.
time. He learned to read Hebrew mechanically,
Bye.
and to mistranslate the Bible, to be launched, a boy of 9,
Turkey.
into the labyrinth
Come
of
on.
the Talmud. But a traveling grammarian, Solomon Hanno, promoted the development of the germs within him, and inspired him with love for the Hebrew language. His labor was not in vain. The seed sown by Hanno was to bear thousandfold fruit. Wesley's chief interest was the study of the holy writings in the original tongue. It was the aim of his life to understand them from all points of view. Owing to his father's frequent contact with non-Jewish circles, in the course of business, Wesley obtained an insight into actual life, and absorbed other branches of knowledge, the modern languages, geography, history, descriptions of travels. These only served as auxiliary sciences to be employed in his special study of the scriptures, and by their means to penetrate deeper into their thought and spirit. Like Mendelssohn, Wesley was self-taught. Very early he developed taste, a sense for beauty, feeling for purity of speech and form, and repugnance to the mixed dialects and the jargon commonly used among German Jews. Wesley again resembled Mendelssohn in character, distinguished as he was by strict conscientiousness and elevated feelings of honor. In him, too, thoughts, sentiments, words, and deeds showed no discrepancy. He was of deep, pure piety and unswerving
Get out of the
adherent to
way.
Judaism. His nature, however, did
Cool.
not display the gentle pliancy of Mendelssohn's. He was stiff and pedantic, more inclined to juggle with words and split hairs than to think deeply, and he had no correct idea of the action of world-moving forces. All his life Wesley remained a visionary, and saw the events of the real world through colored glasses. In one way Wesley was apparently superior to Mendelssohn. He was a poet. In reality, however, he only possessed uncommon 368 facility and skill in making beautiful, well-sounding verses of blameless refinement, of graceful symmetrical smoothness, and accurate construction. Wesley was greatly charmed by the laws of Emperor Joseph in favor of the Jews, especially by the command to erect schools. He beheld therein the dawn of a golden age for the Jews, whilst Mendelssohn, with his keen perception, from the first did not expect great results. He remarks, "It is perhaps only a passing idea, without any substance, or, as some fear, it has a financial purpose." Wesley, however, composed a glowing hymn of praise to the noble rule and the magnanimity of Emperor Joseph. As soon as he was informed that the rigidly Orthodox party in Vienna regretted the order to establish schools as an interference with their liberty of conscience, he addressed a Hebrew letter March, 1782, called Words of Peace and Truth, to the Austrian congregations, exhorting them to welcome it as a benefit, to rejoice in it, and at once execute it. He explained that it was a religious duty of the Jews, recommended even by the Talmud, to acquire general culture, that the latter must even precede a knowledge of religion, and that only by such means could they remove the disgrace which, owing to their ignorance, had weighed upon them for so long a time. Wesley emphasized the necessity of banishing the barbarous jargon from the midst of the Jews, and of cultivating a pure, euphonious language. He sketched a plan of
Euphonious?
instruction in his letter, showing how the
Euphonious.
Jewish youth should be led, step by step, from elementary subjects to the study of the Talmud.
Is that right?
This letter, written with fervor, impressive eloquence, and in a beautiful Hebrew style, could not have failed to produce great effect, had not Wesley, in his fantastic manner, recommended that all Jewish youths, without distinction of talents and future profession, should be taught, not only history and geography 369 but also natural sciences, astronomy, and religious philosophy, because only by this preliminary knowledge could a thorough understanding of Holy Writ and of Judaism be acquired. This epistle bore him both sweet and bitter fruit. The community of Trieste, chiefly comprising Italian and Portuguese Jews, who, unlike the Germans, did not consider culture as heresy, had applied to the governor, Count Zinzendorf, declaring their readiness to establish a normal school, and begging him to advise them how they might procure textbooks on religion and ethics. Zinzendorf directed them to Mendelssohn, whose celebrated name had penetrated to that distant place. Accordingly, Joseph Chaim Gallo, in the name of the Congregation of Trieste, addressed a petition to the Jewish sage of Berlin for his writings. On this occasion, Mendelssohn called the attention of the people of Trieste to his friend Wesley and to his circular letter, recommending the founding of Jewish schools, and the community forthwith entered into negotiations with him. Thus his fervent words met with early encouragement from the strictly pious people. However, a storm now broke out against him. They were particularly indignant at his hearty approval of Emperor Joseph's reforms. The unamiable manner in which princes were wont to concede freedom, the force brought to bear upon the Jews, a natural aversion to forsake the past, the legitimate fear that through school education and partial emancipation young men would be seduced from Judaism, and that the instruction given at the normal schools would supersede the study of the Talmud. These things had induced the rabbis and the representatives of tradition to oppose the reforming Jewish ordinances of Emperor Joseph. Besides, men of doubtful piety, such as Herz Homburg, eagerly pressed forward to obtain appointments at the newly founded training schools, 370, and to tempt the youthful students to innovations. There were, to be sure, intelligent men, especially in Prague, who greeted the new laws as salutary measures, and hoped that by these means the Jews would rise out of their wretched, demoralized condition. But this minority was denounced by the Orthodox as innovators and triflers. Religious simplicity, which at every puff of wind feared the downfall of the edifice of faith, and the desire of gain, which fattened upon ignorance, and the perverse method of instruction in a corrupt dialect, worked hand in hand to predispose the communities against school reforms. Wesley destroyed the whole opposition with one blow. He who had hitherto been respected as an Orthodox believer, now supported the new order of things. Further, in his incautious way, he had quoted the Talmudical sentence, "A Talmudist who does not possess knowledge general culture, is uglier than a carcass." This expression greatly angered the Orthodox. The Austrian rabbis dared not attack him openly, because he had only followed the emperor in his ideas. They appear therefore to have incited certain Polish rabbis to condemn his circular letter and excommunicate him. Although the zealots were without support from Berlin, they continued in their heretic hunting, causing the pulpits to re-echo with imprecations against Wesley. And in Lissa his letter was publicly burned. He had the bitter experience of standing alone in this conflict. None of his adherents publicly sided with him, although he was contending for a just cause by noble methods and in a most becoming manner. Mendelssohn did not like such disputes, and at this time was suffering too much, bodily and mentally, to take part. Thus Wesley had to conduct his own defense. He published a second letter April 24, supposed to be addressed to the Trieste congregation, in which he again dwelt upon the importance of regular instruction, and of the abolition 371 of old practices, and disproved the charges against him. Gentle and forbearing as he was, he avoided retorting severely upon his opponents. But he permitted words of censure against orthodoxy and the one-sided, perverse Talmudic tendency to slip from him. It was, indeed, the irony of history, that the most orthodox among the followers of Mendelssohn, without wishing it, opened fire on Rabbinism, as the Kabbalist Jacob Emden had given the first violent blow to the Kabbalah. By and by, several Italian rabbis of Trieste, Ferrara, and Venice, spoke in favor of Wesley, and recommended culture, although they were unable to bridge over the chasm between it and Rabbinism. Wesley was victorious. And the opposing rabbis laid down their arms. Schools for regular instruction arose here and there, even in Prague. But the strict Talmudists were right. Their suspicions foreboded the future more truly than Mendelssohn's and Wesley's confidence. The old rigid form of Judaism could no more assert itself. Both these men, who had felt so much at ease in the old structure, and wished only to see it cleansed here and there from cobwebs and fungus growths, contributed to sap its foundations. Wesley, ever deserted by fortune, lived to see this decay with weeping eyes. Mendelssohn, more fortunate, was spared this pain. Death called him away in time, before he perceived that his circle, even his own daughters, treated with contemptuous scorn and rejected what his heart held to be most sacred, and what he so earnestly strove to glorify. Had he lived 10 years longer, even his wisdom would perhaps not have availed him to tide over this anguish. He who without a trace of romance had led an ideal life, died ideally transfigured, at the right moment. The friendship and the philosophy which had elevated his life and brought him fame broke his heart. When Mendelssohn was about to raise a memorial to his unforgotten friend, to 372 show him in his true greatness to future generations, he learned from Jacobi that shortly before his death Lessing had manifested a decided liking for the philosophy of Spinoza. Lessing a Spinozist. This pierced Mendelssohn's heart as with a spear. Nothing was so distasteful to him as the pantheistic system of Spinoza, which denied a personal God, providence, and immortality, ideas with which Mendelssohn's soul was bound up. That Lessing should have entertained such convictions, and that he, his bosom friend, should know nothing whatsoever about them. Jealousy that Lessing had communicated to others the secrets so carefully concealed from himself, and deep disappointment that his friend had not shared his own convictions took possession of Mendelssohn. He suspected that his philosophy, if it was true that Lessing had not been pleased with it, would become obsolete and be thrust aside. His whole being rose in resistance against such doubts. These thoughts robbed the last years of his life of rest, made him passionate, excited, feverish. While composing his work in refutation of Jacobi's, to the friends of Lessing, excitement so overpowered him that it brought on his death January 4, 1786. This ideal death for friendship and wisdom worthily concluded his life, and showed him to posterity as he appeared to his numerous friends and admirers, an upright, honest man, in whom was neither falsehood nor guile. Almost the entire population of the Prussian capital, and many earnest men in Germany and beyond its borders mourned the man who, 40 years before, with heavy heart had knocked at one of the gates of Berlin, in fear that the Christian or the Jewish beadle would drive him away. The attempt of his Christian friends, Nikolai, Biester, and Engel, the tutor of the Crown Prince Frederick William III, in conjunction with Jewish admirers, to erect a statue to Mendelssohn 373 in the Opera Square next to those of Leibniz, Lambert, and Sulzer, although it did not meet with approval, characterizes the progress of the time. The deformed son of the so-called Ten Commandments writer of Dessau had become an ornament to the city of Berlin. 374. Chapter 9 The New Chassidism. The alliance of reason with mysticism. Srail Balsham, his career and reputation augment against Rabbinism. He Zadokir Mizrich, his arrogance and deceptions. He devotional methods of the Chassidim era liturgy. A solution of the synods of the four countries. Ossip massacres in Poland. Lija Wilna, his character and method of research. He Mizrich and Karlin Chassidim. Circumstances proved favorable to the spread of the new sectarian proceedings against them in Wilna. Eth of Bir Mizrich. Regress of Chassidism despite the persecution of its opponents. 1750 to 1786 CE. As soon as an historical work has performed its service, and is to undergo a change, new phenomena arise from various sides, and assume a hostile attitude, either to alter or destroy it. It might have been foreseen that the rejuvenescence of the Jewish race, for which Mendelssohn had leveled the way, would produce a transformation and decomposition of religious habits among Jews. The innovators desired this, and hoped, and strove for it. The old Orthodox party suspected and dreaded it. The process of dissolution was brought about also in another way, upon another scene,
Cannot
under
destroy that
entirely
guy.
different conditions, and by other means, and this could not have been foreseen. There arose in Poland a new Essenism, with forms similar to those of the ancient cult, with ablutions and baths, white garments, miraculous cures, and prophetic visions. Like the old movement, it originated in ultra-piety, but soon turned against its own parent, and perhaps hides within itself germs of a peculiar kind, which, being in course of development, cannot be defined. It seems remarkable that, at the time when Mendelssohn 375 declared rational thought to be the essence of Judaism, and founded, as it were, a widely extended order of enlightened men, another banner was unfurled, the adherents of which announced the grossest superstition to be the fundamental principle of Judaism, and formed an order of wonder-seeking confederates. Both these new bodies took up a hostile position to traditional Judaism, and created a rupture. History in its generative powers as manifold and puzzling as nature. It produces in close proximity healing herbs and poisonous plants, lovely flowers and hideous parasites. Reason and unreason seem to have entered into a covenant to shatter the gigantic structure of Talmudic Judaism. The attempt once before made by history, to subvert Judaism by the contemporaneous existence of Spinoza and Sabbatai Zevi, was now repeated by the simultaneous attacks of representatives of reason and unreason. Enlightenment and Kabbalistic mysticism joined hands to commence the work of destruction. Mendelssohn and Israel Balsham, what contrasts! Yet both unconsciously undermine the basis of Talmudic Judaism. The origin of the new Chassidim, who had already become numerous, and who sprang up very rapidly, is not so clear as the movement started by Mendelssohn. The new sect, a daughter of darkness, was born in gloom, and even today proceeds stealthily on its mysterious way. Only a few circumstances which contributed to its rise and propagation are known. The founders of the New Tacitism were Israel of Mijibos, born about 1698, died 1759, and Beer of Mizrich, born about 1700, died 1772. The former received, alike from his admirers and his antagonists, the surname of the Wonder Worker by means of invocations in the name of God, Baal Shem, or Baal Shem Tov, in the customary abbreviated form, Besht. As ugly as the name, Besht, was the 376 form of the founder and the order that he called into existence. The graces did not sit by his cradle, but the spirit of belief in wonder-working, and his brain was so filled with fantastic images that he could not distinguish them from real, tangible beings. The experiences of Israel's youth are unknown. So much, however, is certain. He was left an orphan, poor and neglected, early in life, and passed a great portion of his youth in the forests and caves of the Carpathian Mountains. The spurs of the Carpathian Hills were his teachers. Here he learned what he would not have acquired in the dark, narrow, dirty hovels called schools in Poland, namely, to understand the tongue which nature speaks. The spirits of the mountains and the fountains whispered secrets to him. Here he also learned, probably from the peasant women who gathered herbs on the mountain tops and on the edges of rivers, the use of plants as remedies. As they did not trust to the healing power of nature, but added conjurations and invocations to good and evil spirits, Israel also accustomed himself to this method of cure. He became a miracle doctor. Necessity, too, was his teacher. It taught him to pray. How often, in his forsaken and orphan condition, may he have suffered from want even of dry bread, how often may he have been surrounded by real or imaginary dangers. In his distress he prayed in the usual forms of the synagogue. But he spoke his words with fervor and intense devotion, or cried them aloud in the solitude of the mountains. His audible prayer awakened the echoes of the mountains, which appeared as an answer to his supplications. He seems to have been often in a state of rapture, and to have induced this condition by frantic movements of the whole body while praying. This agitation drove the blood to his head, made his eyes glitter, and wrought both body and soul into such a condition of overexcitement that he felt 377 a deadly weakness come over him. Was this magnetic tension of the soul caused by the motions and the shouting, singing, and praying? Israel Baal Shem asserted that, in consequence of these bodily agitations and this intense devotion, he often caught a glimpse of infinity. His soul soared upward to the world of light, heard and saw divine secrets and revelations, entered into conversation with sublime spirits, and by their intervention could secure the grace of God and prosperity, and especially avert impending calamities. Israel Mijibos also boasted that he could see into the future, as secrets were unveiled to him. Was this a deliberate boast, self-deception, or merely an overestimation of morbid feelings? There are persons, times, and places in which the line of demarcation between trickery and self-delusion cannot be distinguished. In Poland, in Baal Shem's time, with the terrible mental strain created by the Kabbalah in connection with the Sabbatian fraud, the feverish expectation of imminent messianic redemption, everything was possible and everything credible. In that land the fancy of both Jews and Christians moved among extraordinary and supernatural phenomena as in its natural element. Israel steadfastly and firmly believed in the visions seen when he was under mental and physical excitement. He believed in the power of his prayers. In his delusion he blasphemously declared that prayer is a kind of marriage union zivug of man with the Godhead Shekinah, upon which he must enter whilst in a state of excitement. Equipped with alleged higher knowledge of secret remedies and the spirit world, to which he thought he had attained through divine grace, Israel entered the society of men to prove his higher gifts. It must be acknowledged to his credit that he never misused these talents. He did not make a trade of them, nor seek to earn his livelihood with them. At first he followed 378 the humble occupation of a wagoner, afterwards he dealt in horses, and when his means permitted it he kept a tavern. Occasionally, when specially requested, he employed his miraculous remedies, and thereby gained so great a reputation that he was consulted even by Polish nobles. He became conspicuous by his noisy, delirious praying, which must have so transfigured him that men did not recognize the wagoner or horse dealer whom they knew. He was admired for his revelation of secrets. In Poland, not only the unlearned and the Jews considered such gifts and miracles possible. The Jesuits and the Kabbalists had stultified the Christians and the Jews of their country, and plunged them into a state of primitive barbarism. It would have been a remarkable thing if such a wonder doctor, who appeared to have intercourse with the spirit world, had not found adherents, but he can hardly have designed the formation of a new sect. He was joined by persons of a similar disposition to his own, who felt a religious impulse, which could not be satisfied, they thought, by a rigorous, penitential life, or by mechanical repetition of prescribed prayers. They joined Israel, in Mijibos, to pray with devotion, i.e., in a sing-song tune, clapping their hands, bowing, jumping, gesticulating, and uttering cries. At almost the same time there arose, in Wales, a Christian sect called the Jumpers, who resorted to similar movements during prayer, and induced trances and mesmeric dreams. At the same time there was established, in North America, the sect of the Shakers, by an Irish girl, Johanna Lee, who likewise in the delirium of prayer pursued mystic messianic phantoms. Israel need not have been a trickster to obtain followers. Mysticism and madness are contagious. He particularly attracted men who desired to lead a free and merry life, at the same time hoping to reach a lofty aim, 379 and to live assured of the nearness of God in serenity and calmness, and to advance the messianic future. They did not need to pore over Talmudical folios in order to attain to higher piety. It became the fashion in Neo-Chassidian circles to scoff at the Talmudists. Because the latter mocked at the unlearned chief of the new order, who had a following without belonging to the guild of Talmudists, without having been initiated into the Talmud and its appendages. The Chassidim depreciated the study of the Talmud, avowing that it was not able to promote a truly godly life. Covert war existed between the Neo-Chassidim and the Rabbinites. The latter could not, however, harm their opponents so long as Israel's adherents did not depart from existing Judaism. After the death of the founder, when barbarism and degeneracy increased, the feud grew into a complete rupture under Beer of Mizrich. Dodd Beer or Bursch was no visionary like Israel, but possessed the faculty of clear insight into the condition of men's minds. He was thus able to render the mind and will of others subservient to him. Although he joined the new movement only a short time before Israel's death, yet, whether at his suggestion or not, Israel's son and sons-in-law were passed over, and Beer was made Israel's successor in the leadership of the Neo-Chassidian community. Beer, who transferred the center to Mizrich village in Bohemia as superior to his master in many points. He was well read in Talmudical and Kabbalistic writings, was a fluent preacher Maggid, who, to further his purpose, could make the most far-fetched biblical verses, as also Agadic and Zoharic expressions, harmonize, and thus surprise his audience. He removed from the Chassidim the stigma of ignorance, especially disgraceful in Poland, and secured an accession of supporters. He had a commanding appearance, did not mingle with the people, but lived the whole 380 weeks secluded in a small room NLY accessible to his confidants, and he thus acquired the renown of mysterious intercourse with the heavenly world. Only on the Sabbath did he show himself to all who longed to be favored with his sight. On this day he appeared splendidly attired in satin, his outer garment, his shoes, and even his snuff-box being white, the color signifying grace in the Kabbalistic language. On this day, in accordance with the custom introduced by Israel Besht, he offered up prayers together with his friends, with the strangers who had made a pilgrimage to him, with the new members, and those curious to see the Kabbalistic saint and wonder-worker. To produce the joyous state of mind necessary to
Uh,
Like moving to the side on my chair is gonna help.
Oh, yes.
Jaina! Come on, come on. Stop messing with me. Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. Mara, what is it? Changing its armaments. Come on.
Necessary to devout prayer, Beer indulged in vulgar jokes, whereby the merriment of the bystanders was aroused. For instance, he would joke with one of the circle, and throw him down. In the midst of this child's play he would suddenly cry out, "Now serve the Lord with gladness." Under Beer's guidance, the constitution of Chassidism remained apparently in the same form as under his predecessor, fervent, convulsive praying, inspiration hitlaibud, miraculous
Pandas.
cures, and revelations of the future, but as these actions did not, as with Israel,
My
flow
God,
from a peculiar
Pandas.
or abnormal state of mind, they could only be imitated. Vertiefus or illusion had to supply what nature withheld. It was an accepted fact that the Chassidian leader, or Zadok, the perfectly pious man, had to be
Dang it.
enthusiastic in prayer, had to have ecstatic dreams and visions. How can a clever plotter appear inspired? Alcohol, so much liked in Poland, now had to take the place of the inspiring demon. Beer had not the knowledge of remedial herbs, which his teacher had obtained in the Carpathian Mountains. He, therefore, devoted himself to medicine, and if his remedies did not avail, then the sick person died of his sinfulness. To predict the future was a more 381 difficult task, yet it had to be accomplished. His reputation as a thaumaturgist depended upon it. Beer was equal to the emergency. Among his intimates were expert spies, worthy of serving in the secret police. They discovered many secrets, and told them to their leader. Thus he was enabled to assume an appearance of omniscience. Or his emissaries committed robberies. If the victims came to the saint in his hermitage to find them out, he was able to indicate the exact spot where the missing articles were lying. If strangers, attracted by his fame, came to see him, they were not admitted, as mentioned, until the following Saturday, to take part in the Chassidian witches' Sabbath. Meantime his spies, by artful questions and other means, gleaned a knowledge of the affairs and secret desires of these strangers, and communicated them to the Zadok. In the first interview Beer, in a seemingly casual manner, was able, in a skillfully arranged discourse, to bring in allusions to these strangers, whereby they would be convinced that he had looked into their hearts, and knew their past. By these and similar contrivances, he succeeded in asserting himself as omniscient, and increasing the number of his followers. Every new convert testified to his divine inspiration, and induced others to join. In order to strengthen respect for him, Beer propounded a theory, which in its logical application is calculated to promote most harmful consequences. Supported by the Kabbalistic formula, that the righteous or the pious man is the foundation of the world, he magnified the importance of the tzaddik, or the chastity in chief, to such an extent that it became blasphemy. A tzaddik is not alone the most perfect and sinless human being, he is not alone Moses, but the representative of God and his image. All and everything that the tzaddik does and thinks has a decided influence upon the 382 upper and lower worlds. The deity reveals himself especially in the acts of the tzaddik. Even his most trifling deeds are to be considered important. The way he wears his clothes, ties his shoes, smokes his pipe, whether he delivers profound addresses, or indulges in silly jokes, everything bears a close relation to the deity, and is of as much moment as the fulfillment of a religious duty. Even when drawing inspiration from the bottle, he is swaying the upper and nether worlds. All these absurd fancies owed their origin to the superstitious doctrines of the Kabbalah, which, in spite of the unspeakable confusion they had wrought through Sabbatai Zevi and Frank, in spite of the opposition which their chief exponent, the Zohar, had encountered at about this time at the hands of Jacob Emden, still clouded the brains of the Polish Jews. According to this theory, the tzaddik, i.e., Burj Mizrich, was the embodiment of power and splendor upon earth. In his street L, or hermitage, i.e., in his dirty little retired chamber, he considered himself as great as the papal vicar of God upon earth in his magnificent palace. The tzaddik was also to bear himself proudly towards men. All this was for the glory of God. It was a sort of Catholicism within Judaism. Beer's idea, however, was not meant to remain idle and unfruitful, but to bring him honor and revenue. While the tzaddik cared for the conduct of the world, for the obtaining of heavenly grace, and especially for Israel's preservation and glorification, his adherents had to cultivate three kinds of virtues. It was their duty to draw nigh to him, to enjoy the sight of him, and from time to time to make pilgrimages to him. Further, they were to confess their sins to him. By these means alone could they hope for pardon of their iniquities. Finally, they had to bring him presents, rich gifts, which he knew how to employ to the best advantage. 383 It was also incumbent upon them to attend to his personal wants. It seems like a return to the days of the priests of Baal, so vulgar and disgusting do these perversities appear. The saddest part of all is that this teaching, worthy of a fetish-worshipping people, met with approbation in Poland, the country distinguished by cumbersome knowledge of Jewish literature. It was just this excess, this overactivity of the spiritual digestive apparatus, that produced such lamentable phenomena. The intellect of the Polish Jews had been so overexcited, that the coarsest things were more pleasing to them than what was refined. Beer dispatched abroad as his apostles bombastic preachers who seasoned his injurious teachings with distorted citations from the scriptures. Simple-minded men, rogues, and idlers, of whom there were so many in Poland, attached themselves to the new Chassidim. The first from inclination to enthusiasm and belief in miracles. The cunning, in order to procure money in an easy way, and lead a pleasant existence. And the idlers, because in the court of the tzaddik they found occupation, and gratified their curiosity. If such idlers were asked what they were thinking of, as they strolled about pipe and mouth, they would reply with seriousness, "We are meditating upon God." The simple people, however, who hoped to win bliss through the chastity and discipline, engaged continually in prayer, until through exhaustion they dropped unconscious. Neo-Chassidism was favored by two circumstances, the fraternization of the members and the dryness and fossilized character of Talmudic study as carried on in Poland for more than a century. At the outset the Chassidim formed a kind of brotherhood, not indeed with the common purse, as among their prototypes, the Essenes and the Jud Christians, but having regard to the wants of needy members. owing to the closeness of their union, 384 their spying system, and their energy, it was easy for them to provide for those who lacked employment or food. On New Year and the Day of Atonement, people, even those who dwelt at long distances, undertook pilgrimages to the Zadik, as formerly to the temple, and left their wives and children to pass the so-called holy days in the company of their chief, to be edified by his presence and actions. Here the Chassidian disciples learned to know one another, discussed local affairs, and rendered mutual help. Well-to-do merchants found opportunity at these assemblies, in conversation with fellow believers, upon whose fidelity and brotherly attachment they could rely, to discover fresh sources of income. Fathers of marriageable daughters sought and easily found husbands for them, which at that time in Poland was considered a highly important matter. The common meals on the afternoons of Saturdays and the holidays strengthened the bonds of loyalty and affection among them. How could meals for so many guests be provided? The wealthy Chassidim regarded it as a duty to support the Zadik liberally. A special source of income was the superstitious belief prevalent among the Chassidim that the Zadik for certain sums Pidyon, redemption could ward off threatening perils and cure deadly diseases. Pressure was brought to bear upon wealthy but weak-minded persons, and they were terrified into believing that they could escape impending calamities only by rich gifts. Whoever desired to enter upon a hazardous transaction consulted the Zadik as an oracle, and had to pay for his counsel. The cunning Chassidim knew everything, were ready with counsel in any emergency, and by their craftiness were able to afford real assistance. The Zadik, however miserly he might be, had to assist the poor and distressed with his revenues. Thus every member received help here. Full of enthusiasm, 385 they returned home from their journey. The feeling that they belonged to a brotherhood elevated them, and they ardently looked forward to the return of the holy time. The poor and forsaken, the fanatical and the unprincipled, could not do better than join this union, this easy-going yet religious order. Earnest men, also, desirous of satisfying their spiritual wants, felt themselves attracted to the Chassidim. Rabbinical Judaism, as known in Poland, offered no sort of religious comfort. Its representatives placed the highest value upon the dialectic, artificial exposition of the Talmud and its commentaries. Actual necessity had besides caused that portion of the Talmud which treated of civil law to be closely studied, as the rabbis exercised civil jurisdiction over their flocks. Fine-spun decisions of new, complicated legal points occupied the doctors of the Talmud day and night. Moreover, this hair-splitting was considered sublimist piety, and superseded everything else. If anyone solved an intricate Talmudic question, or discovered something new, called Torah, he felt self-satisfied, and assured of his felicity hereafter. All other objects, the impulse to devotion, prayer, and emotion, or interest in the moral condition of the community, were secondary matters, to which scarcely any attention was paid. The mental exercise of making logical deductions from the Talmud, or more correctly from the laws of mine and thine, choked all other intellectual pursuits in Poland. Religious ceremonies had degenerated, both amongst Talmudists and the unlearned, into meaningless usages, and prayer into mere lip service. To men of feeling, this aridity of Talmudic study, together with the love of debate, and the dogmatism and pride of the rabbis arising from it, were repellent, and they flung themselves into the arms of the new order, which allowed so much play for 386 the fancy and the emotions, especially preachers, semi-Talmudists who were looked upon and treated by erudite Rabbi Talmudists as inferior and contemptible, who eke out a wretched living, or almost starved, leagued themselves with the Neo-Chassidim, because among them their talents of preaching were appreciated, and they could obtain an honorable position, and be secured against need. By the accession of such elements the circle of Neo-Chassidim became daily augmented. Almost in every town lived followers of the new school, who occasionally had intercourse with their brother members and their chief. With advancing strength the antipathy of the Neo-Chassidim to the rabbis and Talmudists increased. Without being aware of it they formed a new sect, which scorned intercourse with the Talmud Jews. with beer at their head, they felt themselves strong enough to introduce an innovation, which would naturally bring down the anger of the rabbis upon them. Since prayer and the rites of divine service were the chief consideration for them, they did not trouble themselves about the prescriptions of the ritual law as to how many prayers should be said, nor at what time the different services should commence and terminate, but were entirely guided by the feeling of the moment. Through their daily ablutions, baths, and other preparations for public worship, they were seldom ready for prayer at the prescribed time, but began later, prolonged it by the movements of their bodies and their intoning, and suddenly came to an end after omitting several portions. They were especially averse to the harsh interpolations in the Sabbath and festival prayers, the Piyutim. These insertions interrupt the most important and suggestive portions of the service. To abolish these at a blow, the Mizrach introduced the prayer book of the arch-Kabbalist, Isaac Luria, which for the 387 greater part conforms to the Portuguese ritual, and does not contain poetical Platonic additions. In the eyes of the ultra-Orthodox, this innovation was an enormous, or rather a double crime, permitting, as it did, the omission of interpolations hallowed by custom, and the exchange of the German ritual for the Sephardic. This innovation would probably have been severely visited upon the Neo-Chassidim, but that at this time, when the political power of Poland lay crushed, the firm political connection of the Polish Jews had also been dissolved. Poland was distracted by a civil war. In this country, as the Primate of Gnesen complained at the opening of the Reichstag, March 1764, freedom is oppressed, the laws are not obeyed, justice cannot be obtained, trade is utterly ruined, districts and villages are devastated, the treasury is empty, and the coin of the realm has no value. It had been enfeebled by the Jesuits, and was already regarded by Russia as a sure prey. Its king Stanislaus Augustus Poniatowski as a weakling, the plaything of internal factions and external foes. September 1764. In the first year of his reign, Poniatowski among other laws issued a regulation which destroyed the communal union of the Polish Jews. The Synod of the Four Countries, composed of delegates, rabbis and laymen Parnassine, with authority to pronounce interdicts and levy fines, was not permitted to assemble, pass resolutions, or execute them. The dissolution of the Synod was very fortunate for the Neo-Chassidim. They could not be excommunicated by the representatives of the Polish Jewish world, but each individual congregation had to proceed against them and forbid their meetings. Even this step was not taken at once, as the terrible death struggle in which Poland engaged before its first partition was severely felt by the wealthy Jews, who trembled for their lives. The Confederation 388 war broke out, which made many districts a desert. Poland was punished by eternal justice in the same way as it had sinned. In the name of the Pope and the Jesuits, it had always persecuted dissenters, and excluded them from public offices, and, in the name of the dissenters, Catherine plunged the land into fratricidal war. The Russians, for the second time, let loose against Poland the Zaporogian Cossacks. He savage Hajdamaks who inflicted death, by every known method, upon the Polish nobles, the clergy, and the Jews. The Hajdamaks hung up together a nobleman, a Jew, a monk, and a dog, with the mocking inscription, "All are equal." Most inhuman cruelties were inflicted upon captives and the defenseless. In addition came the Turks, who, in the guise of saviors of Poland, murdered and plundered on every side. The Ukraine, Podolia, in general the southern provinces of Poland, were turned into deserts. These misfortunes were more advantageous than injurious to the Neo-Chassidim. They spread in the north, and whilst hitherto they had been able to carry on their cult only in small, comparatively young communities, from this time they gained ground in the large and old congregations. Their numbers had already grown to such an extent that they formed two branches, the Mizrachians and the Karlinians, he former called after their original home, the latter after the village of Karlin, near Pinsk. The Karlinians spread as far as Wilna and Brody. At first they proceeded cautiously. As soon as at least 10 persons had assembled, they looked for a room Street L in which to conduct their services. There they practiced the rites of their creed, and sought to gain new adherents. but all this was skillfully done, so that nothing came to light before they had secured a firm foothold. In Lithuania their system was not yet known, and thus at first they aroused no suspicion. 389 The first violent attack upon them was made by a man whose influence was blessed during his lifetime, and even after death, and who, in a more favorable environment, might, like Mendelssohn, have effected much for the moral advancement of his co-religionists. Elijah Wilna, born 1720. Died 1797, whose name, with the title of Guillaume, is still mentioned by the Lithuanian Jews with reverence and love, was a rare exception among the mass of the Polish Jews. He was of the purest character, and possessed high talents, which he did not put to perverted uses. It suffices to say of his character that in spite of his comprehensive and profound Talmudical erudition, he refused a post as rabbi, in contrast to most scholars in Poland, who were office seekers, and obtained rabbinates by artifice. In spite of the marvelous fertility of his pen in many domains of Jewish literature, he allowed nothing to be published during his lifetime, again in contradistinction to contemporary students, who, in order to make a name and to see their ideas in print, scarcely waited till the ink of their compositions was dry. In his disinterestedness, Elijah Wilna realized the ideal of the Talmud, that a teacher of Judaism should use the law neither as a crown to adorn himself therewith, nor as a spade to dig therewith. In spite of the superiority of his knowledge and the full and general recognition accorded him, he modestly and conscientiously avoided asserting himself. The gratification that results from research, from the seeking of knowledge, completely satisfied him. His intellectual method corresponded in its unaffected simplicity with his character and life. As a matter of course, the Talmud and all the branches connected with or dependent on it filled his mind. But he disliked the corrupt method of his countrymen, who indulged in hair-splitting, casuistry, and subtleties. His sole aim was to penetrate to the simple sense of the text. 390 He even made an attempt at the critical examination and emendation of texts, and by his undistorted explanations he blew down the houses of cards which the subtle Talmudists had erected upon quicksand. It required extraordinary mental force to swim against the high tide of custom and rise above the aberrations into which all the sons of the Talmud in Poland had fallen. In point of fact, Elijah Wilna stood isolated in his time. It seemed as though from his youth he had been afraid of following the errors of his compatriots, for he attached himself to no special school, but, strange to say, was his own teacher in the Talmud. Talmudical studies did not exclusively occupy his mind. Elijah Wilna devoted great attention to the Bible rarity in his circle, and what was still more unusual, he acquainted himself with the grammar of the Hebrew language. Unlike his compatriots, he by no means despised a knowledge of extra-Talmudic subjects, but studied mathematics, and wrote a book upon geometry, algebra, and mathematical astronomy. He exhorted his disciples and friends to interest themselves in profane sciences, and openly expressed his conviction that Judaism would be the gainer from such studies. Only his scrupulous piety, his immaculate conduct, his unselfishness, and his renunciation of every office and position of honor, saved him from the charge of heresy on account of his pursuing extra-Talmudical branches of knowledge. Elijah Wilna, above all, implanted a good spirit in the Lithuanian Jews. He taught his sons and disciples to seek simplicity and avoid the casuistry of the Polish method. In Elijah Wilna the beautiful Talmudical saying was exemplified, "He who flees from honors is sought out by them." At an early age he was recognized, even outside of Poland, as an authority and a man of truth. Yet even Elijah was subject to the delusion that the hateful 391 Kabbalah was a true daughter of Judaism, and contained true elements. He deeply lamented the moral ruin wrought by the Kabbalah among Podolian and Galician Jews, through the rascally Frank, who had driven them into the arms of the church, and made them enemies to the synagogue. Yet he could not free himself from it. Even when the danger of these false doctrines was brought home to him by the rise of the Chassidim, and he was compelled openly to oppose them, he could not relinquish his blind fondness for the Kabbalah. The Neo-Chassidim, or Carlinians, had crept into Wilna and had established a secret street L for their noisy conventicles.
Ah, we're
A
being
trusty
killed.
friend of their leader, and an
Scratch my
emissary
ear
sent by him,
turn
had
around.
stealthily introduced their cult into the town, and won over several members of the Wilna community. Their meetings, their proceedings, and their
know
derision of the
PEMDAS will save us.
Talmudists were betrayed. The whole congregation were greatly excited at this. They were indignant that the Carlinians impudently asserted of the respected Elijah Wilna that, like his occupation and his belief, his life was a lie. The elders and rabbis forthwith took counsel. The Chassidic conventicles were straightway attacked, investigations set on foot, and trials instituted. Writings were found among the Chassidim, which contained the principle that all sadness was to be avoided, even in the repentance for sins. But greatest uneasiness was aroused by the alterations in the liturgy and the disrespectful utterances against the rabbis. Elijah Wilna, who, although he filled no official position, was always invited to the council meetings, and had an important voice in its decisions, took a very serious view of the matter. He beheld in the Chassidic aberration a continuation of Frank's excesses and corrupting influence. The otherwise gentle and meek man became a veritable fanatic. The rabbis and the chiefs of the community, 392 together with Elijah Wilna, addressed a letter to all the large communities, directing them to keep a sharp eye upon the Chassidim, and to excommunicate them until they abandoned their erroneous views. Several congregations immediately obeyed this injunction. In Brody, during the fair, in the presence of many strangers, the ban was published against all those who prayed noisily, deviated from the German synagogue ritual, wore white robes on Sabbath and the festivals, and were guilty of other strange customs and innovations. Elijah Wilna's circle launched a vigorous denunciatory pamphlet against the offenders. This was the first blow that the Chassidim experienced. In addition, their leader, Bir Mizrich, died in the same year 1772. The rabbis imagined in consequence of the excommunication, and thus they felt themselves utterly deserted. Owing to the weakness of the king, and the greed of the neighboring nations, the kingdom of Poland was dismembered. Through this disorganization the union of the Chassidim was broken, and the separated members became dependent upon the legislature, or the arbitrary treatment, of various
I
governments.
think I need to switch out.
However, this storm did not crush them. They remained firm, and did not display the slightest sign of submitting to their opponents Mithnagdim. On the contrary, the struggle made them more active and energetic. They were not deeply moved by the ban under which they had been placed. This weapon, blunted since the contest for and against Jonathan Ibesh Z, could no longer inflict wounds. The Chassidim, grown to the number of 50 or 60,000, formed themselves into small groups, each with a leader, called Reba. Their itinerant preachers encouraged the individual communities to persevere in their tenets, and to accept persecution as a salutary trial. The connection of the groups with one another was maintained 393 inches this way. A chief from the family of Bir Mizrich was placed at the head as the supreme Zadok, to whom the various Reba were subordinate, and for whose use they were to set aside a portion of their income. The possible apostasy of members through the onslaughts from Wilna was met by the order that the Chassidim might read no work that had not received the approval of the Chassidic authorities. Obedience towards their leaders had taken so deep a root in the minds of the Chassidim that they never transgressed this prohibition. Their chiefs distributed among them the sermons or collections of sayings supposed to have been written by Israel Balsham, or Bir Mizrich, which emphasized the high importance of the Zadok, of the Chassidic life, and of scorn for the Talmudist-style writings, which were nevertheless read with admiration by the members, who were kept in a constant state of intoxication. What had hitherto been optional and individual was raised by these writings to the rank of statutes and stringent laws. After Bir's death, two men chiefly contributed to the exaltation of Chassidism, one through his unbounded enthusiasm, the other by his scholarship. These men, neither of whom is open to suspicion, were Israel of Kozianiza north of Radom and Salmon of Liadi, both Bir's disciples. So strong did the Chassidim again become, that a second interdict had to be fulminated against them. This time also the persecution originated in Wilna, and was instigated by Elijah Wilna. The Chassidim were declared to be heretics, with whom no pious Jew might intermarry. Summer of 1781. 2 messengers were sent from Wilna to the Lithuanian congregations to induce them to support the ban. In consequence of this, the collections of Chassidic sermons and other writings, although they contained sentences from Holy Writ, were publicly burnt in Brody and Krakow. In Selvia, near 394 Slum, during the fair, in the presence of large numbers of Jews, the ban was publicly promulgated against the Chassidim and their writings August 21, 1781. But these obsolete methods were of little use. In the Austrian-Polish provinces Galicia, other means were employed by the disciples of the Mendelssohn school against the stultifying system of the Chassidim. The decree of Joseph II, that schools for instruction in German and elementary subjects be established in all Jewish communities, encountered vigorous resistance from all Jews, but especially from Chassidim. In the belief that culture would improve the demoralized and barbarous state of the people, a small body of men, Mendelssohn's admirers, strove zealously to oppose them. Among the most ardent workers for the enlightenment of the Galician Jews was Alexander Keller. Keller and his associates probably obtained a decree from the court at Vienna, commanding that no Chassidic or Kabbalistic writings be admitted into Galicia 1785. After the Second Partition of Poland, denunciations were also leveled against the Chassidim in Russian Poland as dangerous to the state. Salmon of Liadi was dragged in chains to St. Petersburg. Elijah Wilna is said to have been the instigator of this charge, too. Indeed, he persecuted the sect as long as he lived. After his death, the Chassidim took vengeance upon him by dancing upon his grave, and celebrating the day of his decease as a holiday, with shouting and drunkenness. All efforts made to suppress the Chassidim were in vain, because in a measure they represented a just principle, that of opposing the excesses of Talmudism. Before the end of the 18th century they had increased to 100,000 souls. At the present day they rule in congregations where they were formerly persecuted, and they are spreading on all sides. 395. Chapter 10 The Misfim and the Jud Christian Salon. The progressionists he gather Misif avid main des Oses in Schimesli's Mosaidarchus Herzaloman Maimon Ultra of the Berlin Jews influence of French literature step for raising the Jews he progressive and orthodox parties he Society of Friends Riedelder and Conversion Depravity of Berlin Jews Henrietta Herzumberl Dorothea Mendelssohn Klegel Kleiermacher Hatobriand 1786 to 1791 CE. The state of the German Jews, among whom the battle against unreason began, was more satisfactory than that of the Polish Jews. In Germany youthful activity and energy asserted themselves, an impulse to action that promised to repair in a short space of time the neglect of centuries. Great enthusiasm suddenly sprang up, which produced wonderful, or at least surprising, results, and overcame the benumbing effects of apathy. Young men tore the scepter from the grasp of the aged, and desired to preach new wisdom, or rather to rejuvenate the old organism of Judaism with new sap. The synagogue might well have exclaimed, "Who hath begotten me these, seeing I have lost my children, and am desolate, a captive, and removing to and fro? And who hath brought up these?" A new spirit had come upon these youths, which, in one night, put an end to their isolation, and transformed them into organs for historical reconstruction. As if by agreement they suddenly closed the ponderous folios of the Talmud, turned away from it, and devoted themselves to the Bible, the eternal fount of youth. Mendelssohn's Pentateuch translation poured out a new spirit over them, furnished 396 them with a new language, and infused new poetry into them. Whence this body of spirited young men? What had hitherto been their course of education? Why were they so powerfully influenced? Suddenly they made their appearance, prophesied a new future, without knowing exactly what they prophesied, and, scarce fledged, soared aloft. From Poland to Alsace, from Italy to Amsterdam, London, and Copenhagen, new voices were heard, singing in harmonious union. Their significance lay wholly in their harmony. Singly, the voices appeared, then, piping, and untrained. Only when united do they give forth a pleasant and impressive tone. Those who had but recently learned to appreciate the beauties of Hebrew, came forward as teachers, to re-establish in its purity a language, so greatly disfigured, so generally used, and so continually abused. Inspired by ideals which the sage of Berlin had conjured up, they desired to pave the way to a thorough understanding of Holy Writ, to acquire a taste for poetry, and awaken zeal for science. Carried away by ardor, they ignored the difficulties in the way of a people, internally and externally enslaved, which seeks to raise itself to the heights of poetry and philosophy, and therefore they succeeded in accomplishing the revival. On the whole, they achieved more than Mendelssohn, their admired prototype, because the latter was too cautious to take a step that might have an untoward result. But these youths pressed boldly forward, for they had no reputation to lose, and represented no interests that could be compromised. This result was produced by a material and an ideal circumstance. Frederick's eagerness for money, his desire to enrich the land, almost compelled the Jews, especially those of Berlin, to accumulate capital. Owing to their manufactories, speculations, and enormous enterprises on the one hand, and their moderate manner of living on the 397 other, the first Jewish millionaires arose in Berlin, and by their side many houses in affluent circumstances. But what could be done with these riches? To the nobility and the court, Jews were not admitted. The Philistine burghers closed their doors against these Jewish upstarts, whom they regarded with envy. There thus remained for wealthy Jews only literary intercourse, for which they have always had a preference. All or the majority had in their youth made the acquaintance of the Talmud, and were intimate with the world of books. This circumstance gave their efforts an ideal character. They did not worship Mammon alone. Reading in their leisure hours was a necessity to them. As soon as German literature had been naturalized in their midst through Mendelssohn, they included it in their circle of studies, either with the serious object of cultivating themselves or to be in accord with fashion. In this matter they excelled the Christian citizens, who as a rule did not care for books. Jewish merchants, manufacturers, and bankers interested themselves in literary productions, as if they belonged to a guild of learned men, using for them the time that Christian citizens and workmen passed in drinking. The first movement was made in Königsberg, a kind of colony to Berlin. In this town certain men had acquired wealth by their industry and circumspection, and shared in the culture dawning in Germany under the influence of French literature. 3 brothers named Friedel der Beeman, Meyer, and Wolf were the leaders. To this family belonged David Friedel der born 1750, died 1834, a servile imitator of Mendelssohn, who by means of his connection by marriage with the banking house of Daniel Litzig, obtained influence in Berlin since 1771, and brought about close intercourse between Berlin and Königsberg. He also took part in the promotion of the revival among Jews. It was an 398 event in the history of the Königsberg Jews, when Mendelssohn stayed there for several days while on a business journey. He was visited by distinguished persons, professors and authors, and was treated with extraordinary attention. Immanuel Kant, the profound thinker, publicly embraced him. This trifling occurrence gave to the cultured Jews of Königsberg a sort of consciousness that the Jew can by self-respect command the regard of the ruling classes. Moreover, the Königsberg University, at the instigation of certain liberal-minded teachers, especially Kant, admitted Jewish youths thirsting for knowledge as students and academical citizens. Among these young men, trained partly on Talmudical, partly on academical lines, there were 2 who awakened a new spirit, or rather, continued the quiet activity of Mendelssohn with greater effect. These were Isaac Abraham Uckel and Mendel Breslau, both tutors employed by the wealthy, culture-loving Friedel Ders. Isaac Uckel, through Mendelssohn and Wesley, had acquired a dignified, correct Hebrew style contrasting most favorably with the corrupt language hitherto employed. His younger companion, Mendel Breslau, who afterwards took part in the great contest against the old school, was of more importance. He was truly an artist in the Hebrew tongue, and without elaboration or ambiguity he applied biblical phraseology to modern conditions and circumstances. He took as his model the poet Moses Chaim Luzzatto, and like him composed a moral drama, entitled Youth. Supported by two young members of the wealthy Friedeldorf family, Euclid and Breslau, during the lifetime of Mendelssohn, and at the time of Wesley's conflict with the ultra-Orthodox Spring, 1783, issued a summons to the whole Jewish world to establish a society for the promotion of the Hebrew language Chebreth Dor Shlesh Neber, and to found a journal to be 399 called the Gader Misif. They had reckoned upon the support of Wesley, already recognized as an authority upon style, and had asked contributions from him, who, as they expressed themselves, had taken down the harps from the willows of Babylon, and had drawn forth new songs from them. The aged poet gladly joined the young men, but, as if he had had a foreboding of the ultimate result, he warned them against turning their darts against Judaism, and in general against employing satire. Their summons found widespread response. They had chosen the right means to advance culture, and they satisfied a real want. The Hebrew language in its purity and chastity could alone accomplish the union between Judaism and the culture of the day. The gatherer found most encouragement in Berlin, the capital of Jewish culture. Here numerous literary contributions and material support were forthcoming. In the city lived a number of youths moved by the same aspirations as Euclid and Breslau, who fostered enthusiasm for the Hebrew language, and renewed its youth. Not too proud to enter into rivalry with beginners, Mendelssohn also contributed a few Hebrew poems anonymously. It is characteristic of the newly aroused spirit that the fine introductory Hebrew verses in the periodical are represented as being written by a young child who modestly begs admittance, as if henceforth, not the gray-headed Eliphaz, but the youthful Ella who was to be spokesman, and lay down the law. Fresh names appeared in the newly established organ, and their owners, under the collective name of Miskim, contributors to the Gader Misif, first published in the autumn of 1783, mark a definite tendency, a Sturm-und-Drang period of Neo-Hebraic literature. Another pair of friends of Euclid and Breslau afterwards undertook the 400 editorship. These were Joel L.E. and Aaron Hall, or Wolfson he one and earnest inquirer, the other a bold iconoclast, who first verified Wesley's fears, and, in a dialogue between Moses Maimonides and Moses Mendelssohn, subjected unprogressive Judaism to scathing criticism. Two Poles residing in Berlin, Isaac Satano and Ben Zeeb, most accomplished masters of Hebrew style, also belonged to the Miskim, but their studies in German culture had an injurious effect upon their moral character. Besides, the small number of contributors to the Gatherer was swelled by Wolf Heidenheim, a strange man, who equally abhorred the crudeness and folly of the old system, and the frivolity and sophistry of the new, and banished his ill humor by pedantically exact grammatical and Masoretic studies on the lines of the old masters. By his carefully arranged editions of old writings, if he did not destroy, he at least curbed, the old habits of slovenliness and carelessness. The cultivators of Hebrew stretched out friendly hands to each other across widely sundered districts, and formed a kind of brotherhood which spread to Holland, France, and Italy. David Friedrichsfeld was also an enthusiast for the Hebrew language and biblical literature. He possessed such delicate appreciation of the beauties of the language, that an ill-chosen Hebrew word caused him pain. He constantly insisted upon pure forms and expressions, and was a cultivated and severe judge. In his youth, Friedrichsfeld had chosen the better fate, by turning his back upon Prussia, so cruel to the Jews, and emigrating to the free city of Amsterdam. He heartily welcomed, with youthful ardor, the plan for the study of Hebrew, and lived to enjoy the good fortune of celebrating in Hebrew verse the complete emancipation of the Jews in Holland. At his proposition, the Jewish poets in Holland joined 401 the ranks of the Miskim. The most renowned was David Franco Mendes in Amsterdam, born 1713. Died 1792.
There's an elephant visiting
He was
me.
descended from a Murano
Oh my
family,
goodness.
was a disciple of the poet Luzzatto and latter lived in Amsterdam, and took him as
Good
a
morning
pattern.
there.
A
My
series
daughter's
of
like,
occasional poems, in the form of the Jud's Spanish
Got your
poetry of the
computer up and
17th
running yet?
century, had gained him a name which was increased by his Hebrew historical drama, The Punishment of Athalia Gemelli Athalia. It distressed Franco Mendes to see how the Jews turned away from Hebrew to the fashionable French literature, because the latter produced beautiful, artistic works, whilst the Hebrew language seemed smitten with sterility. This disgrace Mendes desired to blot out, and, following in the wake of Racine and Metastasio, he undertook to dramatize the interesting history of the royal boy Josh who, to be protected from murderous hands, was brought up secretly in the temple, and of the downfall of the bloodthirsty Queen Athalia. In France, the Hebrew literature of the Mispim was represented by Moses Einstein, or Moses Metz, who for several years was private tutor to Mendelssohn's children. He was a mathematician of great repute, whose work has been praised by qualified authorities of the first rank. Thus he wrote a work upon integral and differential calculus, which won the applause of Lagrange and Laplace. But he never published any of his writings. He only gave voice to triumphal songs in Hebrew upon the victory of freedom over
How you doing,
slavery in
sweetie?
France, and some of these were sung in the synagogues. Einstein influenced an advocate Gregorius of the liberation of his co-religionists in France, and provided him with material wherewith to defend them. Einstein formed a contrast to an older teacher in Mendelssohn's house, Urs Homburg, a great favorite with Mendelssohn. The 402 latter was deceived in him, and trusted in him too far when he invited his cooperation in the Pentateuch translation. Homburg was of a prosaic nature, actuated wholly by selfish motives, and was somewhat of a place hunter. Through Homburg, during his stay in GZ, and Elijah Morpurgo, who corresponded with Mendelssohn and Wesley, the educational influence of the Mispim penetrated to Italy. And the younger generation, which afterwards united with the French Jews, drew inspiration from that source. In this manner, the Hebrew language and Neo-Hebraic poetry became a bond of union for the Jews of Western Europe, to some extent embracing also the Jews of Poland, and led the way to an astonishingly swift and enduring revival. The Hebrew tongue was known to almost all Jews, with the exception of a few ignorant villagers, and afforded an excellent medium for propagating European culture. Thousands of youths who studied the Talmud in various colleges, gradually, for the greater part secretly, took an active share in the movement, and drank deep draughts from the stream of innovation. Thus, with the expected deliverance from political oppression, which had already been realized in various places, there arose a peculiar excitement and confusion. The old and the new mingled, forming a kind of a spiritual hodgepodge. The question was raised whether or not, beside the Talmud, it was allowed to engage in biblical studies and profane literature, to cultivate philosophy, and in general to study the sciences Chokmah. The great rabbis, Ezekiel Landau, Raphael Cohen, and others, condemned such studies, whilst Mendelssohn and Wesley, blamelessly pious men, not only permitted, but even recommended them for the elevation of Judaism. Of the old and respected authorities,
Alright,
some
so how are we doing? Let's take a look. We're at 2:45. I'm an hour and 15 minutes short. But what a day this has been. We'll see if we can pull it together and get the rest of our time in a little bit later on. But until then, I'm going to go. My daughter's just got up, and she says she's hot, so I want to go and see if I can put the air on in the house and get things to cool down and give her a little cool pack. And